Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to one of my regular updates from the Capitol. I've got three topics at the top I'd like to cover, and then I'll turn it over to Laura for your questions. First, I have felt for a long time, and believe very strongly, that women in America, women in Virginia, ought to have the freedom to decide how and when to start a family. Unfortunately, those freedoms around particularly reproductive health have been dramatically cut back. We saw the Dobbs decision, which overturned the right to an abortion that had been ensconced as law for 50 years in this country, a dramatic cutback on women's rights. And yesterday, we had an opportunity to guarantee for women all across America the right to contraception. So again, a woman can decide when to start a family. Unfortunately, many of my Republican colleagues who say we've got no intent in undermining contraception would not put their vote for the legislation we put forward yesterday. We didn't get 60 votes. Two of my Republican colleagues, Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, joined all of the Democrats in this effort. But I hope folks, as they go to the polls this year, will remember, don't look at politicians, what they say about women's health care rights. Look at what they've done. Unfortunately, we saw in Virginia a right to contraception law vetoed as well. I know in the future the Senate will take up the right to IVF, the ability for those families who can't conceive through traditional means to be able to start a family. We've seen that under attack from Alabama. We're going to try to bring a law to the Senate floor and again allow senators to make a decision with their vote, not their words, about whether they will be willing to protect women's freedom and reproductive health choices. Again, it was disappointing yesterday. People have said, well, was it a show vote? Yeah, it was a show of whether you as a senator believe that women in this country have a right to contraception. Unfortunately, we didn't get 60 votes so we could actually advance that bill and make it the law of the land. Secondly, I wanted to raise the issue around legislation that I co-sponsored this week called Tyler's Law. We all know the scourge of fentanyl is literally killing over 100,000 Americans a year. Too much of this fentanyl is coming in from Mexico, too much of it is coming with Chinese precursors built in. And unfortunately, we don't have protocols set up at all our hospitals so that if somebody presents at an emergency room, they get tested for fentanyl. Tyler's Law is named after Tyler Shamash, who unfortunately did not get tested in a hospital and died because there was not that testing for fentanyl. We've even seen in Northern Virginia the case of Malcolm Kent, who went into a Fairfax hospital, didn't get tested, got released, and the next day died from fentanyl. We need to make sure that this law, this bill becomes law so that as folks present at a hospital in an emergency room, this becomes a standard act of testing for fentanyl. That's not going to solve all of the problem around this issue. We need to do more in terms of cutting back on the drug gangs from Mexico. We need to put more pressure on China. But we sure as heck ought to make sure that if a person presents at the emergency room, that it is standard procedure and protocol that individual gets tested for fentanyl. Because with over 100,000 Americans a year killed by fentanyl, the failure to do so can be deadly. Final issue on one that's a little more uplifting. You all may recall back in 2022, Tim Kaine and I and others found that there was a animal facility in Cumberland, Virginia, owned by a company named Envigo, where 4,000 beagles were being held in awful conditions. They were being malnourished. They were kept in cages that were not cleaned. There was about any kind of animal abuse possible. Through our actions, we were able to free those 4,000 beagles. And the good news is that all of those beagles found loving homes around Virginia and, frankly, around the country. That was good that we were able to find that and discover that wrongdoing, get the beagles out, This is more than about animal welfare. It's about kind of basic human decency to animals. But just this week as well, Envigo, the company that was so negligent, got fined $35 million. And that $35 million, some of that will actually go to animal welfare organizations around Virginia and around the country. There's a little bit of poetic justice that the company that was so abusive to these dogs are now going to have to pay the price. This is, again, an example that our justice system works, and Envigo is being held accountable for their enormous maltreatment of those 4,000 beagles. Again, I think just to finish up on this one, some of you may recall, and I can't remember if it was this year or last year's, I think it was this year's Puppy Bowl around the Super Bowl. There was an Envigo beagle that had been released from that facility. So justice done, at least for beagles, those 4,000 who've now got great homes around Virginia and around the country. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Laura and be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is from Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Wanted to talk to you about more about the situation involving fentanyl and the border. As you know, fentanyl receives a lot of attention in part because of southern border smuggling. What are your thoughts on President Biden's new asylum restrictions and the timing of the announcements? And I know you would prefer probably to have had a bipartisan agreement, but I just wanted to get your take on it.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the border's a mess. We need to do more. And we had an opportunity to provide the strongest border security law in our country's history. And it was bipartisan, negotiated by my good friend, very conservative Senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. The only reason we didn't take that bill up and pass it was callous political interference from Donald Trump, who said, hey, I don't want to really solve the border. I want to simply bash President Biden. And it was hugely disappointing that we didn't pass that bill. But I think President Biden's actions, I think, again, he was waiting until after the Mexican elections, which took place this past weekend. But I think it was appropriate to shut down the border. If more people come across, then can be handled so that we don't have this policy of catch and release where people who are waiting to get their hearing are released into the country, or sometimes they don't show up. I think it was a strong executive action. The challenge is it probably won't stand up in court. So he will have taken this action. But without the force of law, the question will be whether it stands up to judicial review. We must fix the border, and the only way you can do that is by passing a strong bipartisan law. I would point out, though, that the fentanyl that is coming across, and part of that bipartisan law would have dramatically increased the screening at the border. The fentanyl that's coming across is not coming across on the individuals seeking asylum. We hear that from the FBI. We hear that from the intelligence community. The fentanyl that's coming across is coming through in trucks at traditional ports of entry. And what we don't have, and what would have been solved by passing the bipartisan border security law, it would have dramatically increased the screening at the border, where we could shut down this deadly drug that, again, has cost over 100,000 Americans a year their life.
Thank you very much.
Senator, our next question is Brandon Ponton with WTKR.
Hello, Senator. I had a question for you on a topic you've addressed over the years, but just heading into the 2024 election, what are your concerns this year about disinformation, and what do you think can be done to try and address that?
I'm hugely concerned about disinformation. The truth is, in some ways, we may be more vulnerable today than we were 4 years ago. And the reasons are, one, other nation states are potentially using this tool. We've thought about it in the past: Russia, China, Iran. There have been public reports that even an ally like Israel may be trying to influence our elections. And I'm waiting to get a briefing from the intelligence community on that. I also am concerned about the fact that, let's just face it, more Americans believe crazy conspiracy theories. So the bad guys don't necessarily have to plant always a false story. They simply have to amplify things that are, racing around the internet on some of these extreme sites and bring more eyeballs to those stories because people are willing to believe some of the crazy conspiracy theories. Third is there was 6 months because of a legal case where we didn't even have voluntary communications between social media companies and law enforcement. That is restarted, but we lost a valuable 6 months. And then finally, we've got artificial intelligence tools that can create deep fakes where my face and my voice or your face and your voice can be created to say anything, and it's not you, even though to the observer it will appear to be you and your voice. That is enormously, enormously challenging. Now, we did get 21 tech companies in February of this year at the Munich Security Conference to agree to put what's called watermarking, so that if a political ad has been changed or manipulated or an image appears on an ad that it's not real and it's been AI altered, there would be an identification indicator and that would be then taken down. The unfortunate thing is that's all voluntary, and those 21 companies, and it was not just about America, I'm afraid that they're not putting appropriate security in place. The European Parliament elections literally start today. We've got the British elections on July 4th. We need to keep the pressure on these tech companies to show where the beef is, show us what they've done. And what my committee will do, the Intelligence Committee, is we've had a classified hearing on this. We're going to have a public hearing with some of the leaders of the tech companies to get this information out, to press them on what they're doing. We've got enough differences in America amongst ourselves. We don't need foreign countries interfering in our elections, and we sure as heck don't need further undermining of trust by AI tools that could be enormously damaging to faith in our elections. So I've got more work to do on our Intel Committee. I wish others in Congress, in a bipartisan way, would elevate this issue. Nobody wins if a country like Russia or China interferes in our elections.
Senator, our next question is Nick Benton with the Falls Church News and Press.
Well, that's basically my question. Was exactly what you just spoke to, the foreign interference in our elections. Is there anything more you can say about that? The domestic impact?
The thing that we've discovered and our foreign countries have discovered is that it's really cheap to put disinformation out. It doesn't cost near as much as a tank or a submarine or an airplane. So this tool is being used by foreign governments all the time. We saw, for example, in Slovakia, a country that was very pro-Ukraine 2 years ago, and literally took in 500,000 Ukrainian refugees. Because of Russian disinformation in Slovakia, you now have a pro-Russian president, and the majority of the Slovaks believe that America started the war in Ukraine. That's the kind of awful effect that foreign influence can have. Now, that's a small nation state, but the idea that they won't turn those tools against America, anybody who assumes that's not going to be the case is grossly naive. And remember, and we documented all this in 2016, this is not some simple, well, somebody's just posting a few crazy theories on an offbeat website. In the past, these nations, Russia in particular, have tried to bring Americans literally to physical violence. There was a case in 2016 where there was a group of folks of Muslim faith in Texas that were having a demonstration at the same time with a group of Texas far-right group. Luckily, violence was prevented, but that whole event was created by Russian disinformation. And anyone who doesn't think that's going to happen again, I think is sadly mistaken. So we need to do more in terms of public education. We need to hold the tech companies responsible. I would like to have legislation passed that would prohibit manipulation on political ads using AI. I'm not sure we're going to get that done, even though 14 states around the country have already done that, and the reddest of red states have done that. So I hope Congress would take that up. But if we don't take it up, we ought to make sure the tech companies do all they can. And this is, again, I don't care where we fall on the political spectrum in America. not recognizing that foreign malign influence is bad for the health of our country is something that we all ought to agree on.
Senator, our next question is Chris Horn with Wavy News.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking our questions today. Wanted to find out, with Tyler's Law, do you think we have adequate staffing in ER right now to enact Tyler's Law?
Yeah.
And also, do we have the technology, if we get the money for the border, do we have the technology to inspect the trucks to find the fentanyl that's coming across?
Yeah. I believe that we have the technology to do the testing. And I don't believe that this would require dramatic staffing up in our ER rooms. I mean, somebody presents in an emergency room, there are a series of kind of standard tests that take place. It's, you get your blood pressure taken, you get a few other tests done. The idea of a quick test for fentanyl, I think, is imminently doable, and we simply need to make this a requirement for people who present in emergency rooms. And while I am not an expert on screening technology, I have been told that we do have the technology that would screen all of the trucks in a relative quick way. We've got, again, Mexico has become now our largest trading partner as we move, particularly some of the manufacturing jobs out of China to nearshoring with our friends, and strengthening ties with Mexico on trade is important. Right now, I believe we only test not every truck, but it's kind of intermittent. I do believe we have the technology that can do this at speed and scale so that we can try to slow the flow. It may not eliminate every bit, but every little bit helps, because, again, the thing that was most shocking to me, if you think about a packet of sugar and how small those sugar crystals are in that packet of sugar. Sometimes when they lace fentanyl, for example, into opiates, if you put 2 to 3 of those crystals into a opioid, it may not have a fatal effect. But if you go from 3 to 5 crystals, and think how small and how tiny that amount is, you can have a fatality come out of that. So screening for this drug is going to require more at the border. It's going to require greater cooperation from the Mexicans, and I hope the new president in Mexico, Ms. Sheinbaum, will take this up. But it's also going to take a lot more pressure on China, where a lot of these precursor, what's called APIs, are actually put together and then shipped to the Mexican drug cartels.
Senator, our final question is from Sarah Hammond with 13 News Now.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing this today. I just wanted to ask, your message to women who are concerned after yesterday's vote on the right to contraception and, kind of ongoing threats to reproductive rights overall.
Well, my message to women and men who are part of families everywhere is you got to vote. And anybody that says, oh, I don't want to go after your ability to get contraception, I don't want to go after, IVF kind of fertilization techniques, I will kind of defer on questions on a woman has a right to an abortion. Talk is cheap. What makes a difference is where you vote and how you vote. And as we saw yesterday, even though virtually every Republican senator said they believed that contraception was not under assault, they wouldn't back what is a very straightforward law. I commend Senator Collins and Murkowski for doing that. The very same folks will have a vote, I'm sure, in the next week or so, too, on IVF. And they say, of course, we want to allow families to have kids, because if they can't conceive in a traditional manner. But I'll doubt, again, whether we'll get the 60 votes to advance that law. And as we've seen in state after state where a woman's right to choose has been on the ballot, when men who want to respect women's health care rights get out, they turn out in remarkable numbers. And, again, I think that's the reason why the Democrats in Virginia took back the General Assembly.
Senator, that was our final question.
Well, thank you, everybody. Be safe. And again, I'll be disappointed if you don't write up our Beagle story. 4,000 of those Beagles, and go back and check out the Puppy Bowl in terms of how cute some of those dogs were. So, and still are, I should say. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.